ground from the HR standpoint, from the employer and employee standpoint on the ramifications of the antiquated unemployment system that we have. But most importantly, we have people here that can help us today. We have people here that, sure, you'll hear some complaints and some issues, but you're also going to hear some solutions, and that's what we're here for. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, and we're going to do it really quick. We have a few in-person people. We're going to start with Jeff Oswald. Well, hold on just a second, sir. Cindy, we have Representative Ruiz is having difficulty getting in. Could you resend the link to him? Today's link. Thank you. In committee, we'll do bill introductions at the end of the meeting. Jeff, thanks for coming today. I know that you and Phil both traveled a long ways, and we really appreciate your time. I, for one, appreciate all your efforts all summer long trying to figure this out. And please introduce yourself, let the committee know who you are and what you do, and we'll get started. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Chairman Tarwater and honorable committee members. My name is Jeff Oswald. I am the president of Unemployment Insurance Services, and we are a third-party administrator of unemployment claims on behalf of employers. We've been representing employers in the state of Kansas since 1977. So we have a long history, a long track record. And we also happen to represent employers in all 53 of the jurisdictions of unemployment, which includes all 50 states, as well as Washington, D.C., the American Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. So we have a very unique perspective on what is occurring in the unemployment world and what is occurring specifically in the state of Kansas and how it compares to other states. I want to make it very clear, first of all, that the issue I'm going to talk about, the fraudulent issue, that's occurring in every state. We have, like I said, clients in all 53 states. To my knowledge, we've had a unemployment claim that is of fraudulent nature in just about every one of them. So this is not a unique circumstance to Kansas. What is unique to Kansas has been the incredible volume of unemployment claims that has occurred of a fraudulent nature in your state. Since October 1st of 2020, that's when the fraudulent activity really began to explode here nationwide, as well as particularly in Kansas. We've identified more than 17,000 fraudulent unemployment claims for all of our clients. For our Kansas clients, their portion of that is roughly 16,600. That is an incredible amount of the percentage of the unemployment claims that we've identified for all of our clients in all 50 states as fraudulent. Since January 1st of 2021 alone, we've identified and processed more than 4,100 fraudulent unemployment claims for Kansas employers. So the trends do not seem to be getting better. The trends seem to be getting much worse. This does not count, by the way, individuals who we have received a notice on a second, third, and even an occasion of fourth time. So the individuals filed an unemployment claim, we've reported it as fraudulent, and now we've gotten subsequent notices of second and third and fourth times. Okay. In interest of fairness, I did contact the Kansas Department of Labor, and I did tell them I was going to be coming to testify. I have had a good relationship with the KDOL. I tend to keep that. We're going to have a meeting tomorrow afternoon about some issues that are transpiring as we speak. And I have a lot of faith in Acting Secretary Brett Flaxbarth. I've worked with him many times in the past. But I think, and also in fairness, I needed to be representing my clientele. which is about 300 Kansas employers, so to speak. We represent, amongst other things, major hospitals, just about every major school district in the state, large and small, many cities, many large organizations. I think I already mentioned hospitals. So we run a very wide breadth of the type of employer that we represent. So I wanted to be factually accurate as best as I could. So that I started with, how do we set apart from Kansas from the rest of the nation? And I went in and I went to the USD Department of Labor website, pulled up the most recent claims report by state that I could find, which happened to be week ending January 16th of 2021. There was 960,668 claims filed nationally in the United States. The 5 states below, if you have a copy of my testimony, was California at 123,900, Illinois at just a little bit shy of 109,000, Kansas had 66,323 claims filed for that week, and then we beat New York and Texas, who came in at 60,900 and then 50,800. So I did the next logical step, and I went and compared those same weeks to states that operate here in the Midwest. Colorado had the worst, and Colorado, in fairness, is dealing with a little bit of their own fraud issue, but just not to the degree that the Kansas situation is. Then, of course, Missouri came in second, and then the rest of the states, Oklahoma, Iowa, Nebraska, and Arkansas, all came in far less than 10,000 claims per week. So after taking that and realizing that Kansas was sticking out pretty, significantly nationally, I went and I started identifying like companies and like industry groups that I have in my clientele. Just so happens that we represent an equal number of Kansas and Missouri school districts. And the sizes, again, are pretty close to the same. We represent most of the large school districts in the state of Missouri as well. So of the 60 Kansas, Missouri school districts that we have on each side, since October 1st of 2020, we've identified more than 7,200 fraudulent unemployment claims for our Kansas school districts, and the number of fraudulent claims we've identified for the Missouri school districts is 65. We're not even in the same galaxy, if you would, okay? I wanted to take it one step further, and I took a client, 2 clients actually, that we have. They have a large employee base on both sides of the state line in Kansas City Metro, where we're located. One is a large hospital network, and the other one is a large professional services provider. In both cases, the Missouri contingency of employment is 3 times that of the Kansas employee base. The professional service provider, we've identified since October 1st, 286 fraudulent Kansas claims. We have identified 3 in Missouri. And then for the large hospital network, the Kansas employer had 246, and again, Missouri, we only had 3. So, and the other problem is this is growing exponentially. Every week, we get a report, an email from the Kansas Department of Labor and all states that there's an unemployment claim for these employers on what's called the SIDES platform. It's a nationwide platform in which employers can go out and respond to their unemployment claims. So when we go out and we look at this employer, and this particular example that I brought today, I brought several, but I'm just going to focus on this one. We print out the entire dashboard as it appears to us of all the unemployment claims that have been filed against that particular employer for the state of Kansas. We have received so many at one time for all of our clients in Kansas that we've now resorted to saving the platform as a PDF and emailing it to them with simple instructions of write fraud on every name that is an employee who's still working. This is an example of that. This is Washburn University. It is 150 claims since January 1st of 2021. If you went through these pages, you would see fraud written on nearly every name. And that's just 2 weeks worth of unemployment claims. Okay? So, in fairness, we understand there's a technological issue. We understand there's some problems with the what they've been dealing with and everything, and we understand that, okay? The issue here is that this has taken up an incredible amount of time for our employers. I don't want to sound like I'm sitting here whining about how much work I have to do, which is substantial, by the way. But my employers, my clients, every time they receive an unemployment claim that is fraudulent, they have to go to the employee, and I can imagine that each conversation goes something like this. Jeff, did you file an unemployment claim? Obviously you didn't because you're working today. And when you say no, then that takes a 10 to 15-minute conversation per employee to assure them that A, your system has not been hacked and that you haven't done something that is negligent with their data and their information. And then you have to assure them that this is going to be taken care of and here's the processes that you have to do. It's not just as simple as reporting it to the Kansas Department of Labor fraud portal. They then also have to go out and they have to do things to protect their identity because it has been now compromised. So they have to go through the FTC protocol of notifying credit bureaus, et cetera, et cetera. So this becomes an incredible amount of time and effort that each Kansas employer is expending. And that, by the way, is 150 times in 2 weeks, all right? And that's just 2 weeks. Washburn University, who normally gets 6 unemployment claims a year, they had less than 50 pandemic claims, the entire shutdown for the pandemic. They have, as of when I did this Sunday, they've got more already, they have had more than 642 unemployment claims, of which 593 were identified as fraud. And that number grew today when we got the new email list, and we have another 100 or so that are out there actively need to be responded to. So the time expenditure is incredible. My clients are spending a great deal of time on this topic. And in conclusion, to wrap this up, I just want to give, I feel, what should be the consensus of my clientele's opinion. And again, I'm stressing to you that's over 300 clients here. There's an incredible amount of frustration and anger right now that's as a result of this. Nobody blames the KDOL for this issue. Nobody said that they created this issue. But they are the ones who can and should be controlling what is occurring with this issue. And the feeling, the frustration is not just with the volume, but they feel like they're on a merry-go-round that's never going to stop. They feel like the information we provide to you and the employee provides you, because each time we have an unemployment claim, we report it through the sides as a fraud. The employee's reporting it through the portal as fraud. They feel like this information is just going into a black hole. And it's only increased, this frustration is only increased and enhanced when you have the individuals who we previously reported a second and third and a fourth time showing back up. This report right here, the Washburn one, has the same person on it 3 times. 3 times in 1 week. Okay, so, or actually 2 weeks, I apologize. So, in closing, the worst conversation I think I've had in this whole thing was one of my school district clients called me up and was very beside herself and wanted to know what she should do with an unemployment claim that was filed in December of a woman who was their employee who died of COVID in November. And she was like, do I need to contact the family? I said, I would suggest you do, because if they collect unemployment claim in her name, it's going to come back against the estate. You'll get a 1099 or something like that. So you need to contact them. She was very distraught over the fact that she had to contact a deceased employee's family to tell them about this. Now, again, this is not the DOL's fault. I understand that. But at some point, as she said, verbatim, enough is enough. And that's how I'm going to leave it, and I will stand to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks a lot. I certainly can hear the frustration, and I can also hear the sympathy that you have for the KDOL. So that was a good mix. Representative Williams has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you may have been able to hear the testimony from the Department of Labor last week. They came and spoke to our committee for a couple days. They provided us some list of things that they can do to improve the system, to help with identity verification and so forth. From what they are recommending to do, what things do you think, or what processes or steps do you think that are priority, that can be done? Do you have any suggestions for us to make sure that the right steps are taken in the right order? And from what you heard from Department of Labor, are we moving in that direction?
There's two parts to that, and I'll answer them both separately. One is, yes, I'm very cautiously optimistic that we are going in the right direction. I think that an identity verification piece on this needs to be put up there as quickly as possible. I do not have to be Sherlock Holmes to think this through, and that the fraudsters are not filing tens of thousands of unemployment claims in any state, particularly Kansas, and they're not profiting for it. They're not doing it because they have a sick sense of humor. They're getting paid. So that's alarming in its nature. We need to get an identity verification piece up as soon as possible. What other states do, and I reached out to Missouri in particular because I have a relationship there as well, I asked them how they do it. And what they do is that if they can't identify and confirm the identity of a single individual through the normal protocols online, that individual is required to go to a career center in person with their identification and prove to the state of who they are. I think that would be also a piece that you would strongly want to consider. The fraud issue is not going to go away. They've learned now that this is big business for them. All right. The USA Today report indicated a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago now, that $36 billion nationwide has left this country in fraudulent unemployment claims. That's not going to stop. They found a golden ticket, and we're going to have to be one step ahead of the curve now from here on out.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, have we received any feedback from Department of Labor regarding those requests of data that we submitted last week?
We have not. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. I don't know if I received your testimony, but also in these crazy times, I know that you'll be able to send it to us later on for our edification, because I'd like to look at those numbers. So my question is similar to that of the previous speaker, is that we're looking at this. I think that given the testimony that we've had from Department of Labor, this is undeniable that we have a tremendous fraud problem. I think some of our fraud is based on just individuals doing terrible things, trying to take advantage of the system and get some money. But I think largely this appears to be a problem of organized crime. Now, I think that just by looking at this in the Commerce Committee, this is not unlike asking the victim of a crime, in this case, Department of Labor and the employers, what they were wearing, when we really should be looking at this in corrections or judiciary and looking at going after these people who are committing these crimes, these people who are running the crime rings, because I don't want to say that this will always happen. Lots of bad things happen, and we as legislators figure out a way to create penalties. Have you looked at criminal and investigative aspects and any conversations occurring with the KBI or anything like that. Because I think that this is a two-part area where we need to make sure that we're funding, but we also need to go after these criminals and get some law and order in here, basically. So tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I would agree with you that this is a multifaceted problem. Okay, I completely agree with that. I do know that the United States Department of Labor, in conjunction with all the unemployment systems in the United States, are working in conjunction with the FBI and trying to stem this issue. This is, in fairness to everybody involved in this is an international problem. This is an international ring. The money is going out of country, and it's a big problem. The commerce employer issue is this. The early return, let me just say this. The earliest return that we have on how the fraud is going to impact the unemployment trust fund is just now coming in. The third quarter statements for reimbursable employers, there was a few isolated instances of unemployment fraud. It was not alarming by any means. It was easily something. The fourth quarter reimbursable statements that are now just coming in as of Friday, the early returns are very scary. And that's the meeting I'm having tomorrow with the Kansas Department of Labor. They've been very proactive in getting on this, but I've already had emails from clients who are identifying as much as 75 to 80% of the employees on their charge statement as individuals that we report as fraud. Now, if you paid that money out, the problem is it's never coming back. You're not recollecting it. And that is going to fall on the employers of this state to replenish the trust funds. So, again, that's the alarm that I think from a commerce point of view is what we are concerned about.
May I ask another question, Mr. Chair? Thank you. I'll make it quick. I would really like to see you all look at least some sort of language to get with either the Chair of Corrections or Chair of Judiciary, because I feel like if we can get on top of this crime that is being committed against our employers, every single one of us have constituents, multiple constituents that have gotten these letters. And so I feel like if we are penalizing them or, hey, if you're in jail, then you can't run a crime ring. So I think we need to look at this from two different sides. I'd love to see you get with them so that we can handle it from our end, but also go after those criminals.
Well, and I respect that. I do know that the Kansas Department of Labor has said repeatedly that they have law enforcement capabilities. So, and when you report a fraudulent unemployment claim as an individual, we don't do it because of this very reason. It generates a police report. Now, I don't know. That's question and answer for the Kansas Department of Labor as to what investigative function they have, or if they have any. Again, it's an issue of if the fraud's occurring in Nigeria, that's where the money is going, realistically, who are you going to prosecute? You must figure out a way to stop the flow of the claims being paid out if that's what's happening, because basically the barn's burned down and now you're trying to keep the house from burning down, in my opinion. So.
Representative Probst, and then Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This fraud loop is, I have a friend that's caught in it. She lost her job and spent the entire time that she was unemployed unable to collect unemployment because she got caught up in this. But my question is, looking at your numbers, it looks, you said that there were 17,000 fraudulent claims and Kansas accounted for 97% of those. Do we have any insight? I mean, that leads me to believe that Kansas is being targeted more heavily by people who are making fraudulent claims. Do we have any insight into why Kansas?
I can only speak from my experience, and that is my clientele across all 50 states. I think, A, there's a technological gap, obviously. B, I think that there's been some struggles at the KDOL at the very beginning of the pandemic that have maybe prevented them from getting a handle on this quicker. And I think that clearly these two factors, the bad guys are pretty smart, and they've identified that, I mean, I'm just saying, the numbers are the numbers, and if I'm looking at that, 97% of the claims I'm getting that are fraudulent are from one state, you have to be led to believe that you're being targeted, yes.
Thank you.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you answered my question partially with Representative Probst's question. But from everything I see, last week we were told that our system was not hacked. And based on what I'm seeing here in your presentation, is there any way that this could happen without being hacked? You may not want to answer that.
Well, no, I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to answer it fairly as I can. I don't believe that the internal government system has been hacked, and here's the reason why. My mother, who's 76, called me yesterday afternoon, said, I've just got a denial, a financial denial that I was not financially eligible for an unemployment claim. Now, she's 76, and she hasn't been in the workforce for a quarter century. So I think it's coming from a variety of sources. I don't think it's any one source. But the data that they're using is oftentimes so old that I would find it hard to believe that they're using recent information. We get claims of all kinds of nature. I've already discussed the deceased people. I had one that was deceased as far back as 2010, all right? We've had spouses who they've used this one spouse's social security number, another spouse's name. Oftentimes the wife the claim is filed under the maiden name. So there seems to be a lot of old information that's being used to file these claims.
Where is that information being found?
Well, according to the USA Today piece that was well written, they interviewed one individual from Nigeria, and he was the only one who was willing to go on record. And what he did was, for the equivalent of $2.50 in cryptocurrency, he would go out and buy your file off the dark web, and for whatever information he could not piece together using that dark web file, he has an Ancestry.com account, and he will go out and search your name, find out what your mother's maiden name was, your spouse's maiden name was, et cetera, and fill in the blanks. And he's made, just one guy sitting at a computer doing this one at a time, he's made over $50,000 US in fraudulent unemployment claims. And like I said to a friend, I don't know what the Nigerian currency is to the American dollar, but I'm guessing he's doing pretty well by himself.
Thank you for this information. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, two additional questions, and then we're going to have to move on. We've got other people that want to testify. Representative Johnson and then Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And looking at the testimony that I believe I have, and you may have gone over this earlier, the previous two questions were very similar, but it ranked us third in the nation on the number of claims from the DOL.
That's the information that's posted on the Department of Labor website, yes.
So again, just trying to get third, and our surrounding states are typically less than a sixth of us on claims. Was there a spike that might have occurred at that time on the number of the 16th? Has that been trending roughly in that same rank? Is there anything else that might explain why we were so high with only California and Illinois above us?
Mr. Hayes is going to speak to some of this later, so I don't want to steal all his thunder, but if you look at the numbers, other employment numbers compared to the number of unemployment claims that are being filed, it's not washing. It really is not, so.
It looked like we're a factor of 10 higher than most of the other states on that ratio.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I listened to your testimony also on the Senate side just before I came over here and found it really interesting. The issue we have, though, is a huge leak that's occurring every day. So when you were talking about these immediate and maybe more draconian measures that we could take to get this fixed, you know, we're talking about can we mandate that people only file through an employment center, that they only file at their employer's place so that their identity can be verified before the claim goes in? Are those things viable? And just to follow on, you also gave some testimony about how the outflow works. In other words, where the check goes to bank and so on.
Right. So to answer your first question, I think it would be extremely difficult in this technological age to go back to where you filed an unemployment claim in person. Most states, Kansas is not unique in this aspect, has long since closed their local offices, et cetera. To ramp that up would take months anyway, and I don't think, realistically, I think the most immediate path is if you can truly get the identity verification piece in place by the end of February. I think that's the most expedient solution to this. As far as the payment plan, the one I've heard most frequently is when a fraudulent claim is paid out, it is sent to a legitimate American bank, a United States bank, and then there's some kind of process of which I'm not familiar with. I'm not a financial guy. It's immediately then transferred out to an overseas account. From what I understand, it literally sits in these accounts for minutes before they're transferred out. That's how they, and there's also been a lot of, recently, there's been arrest made of American citizens who are acting as mules. They are the conduit for the illegal payments, and then they transfer the funds of the payments out to other off-sea shore accounts. So,
Thank you very much.
Okay, real quick before you leave, I wanted to touch on the Q4 statements that you were talking about. So, to date, we have really had no solid evidence that we are actually depleting our trust fund, and by fraud. And when we asked the Department of Labor, they for some reason do not want to answer that question. I asked them the other day, how many have you identified? Because they said they've identified some, and I asked them for a number, they wouldn't give it. You say that now that these Q4 statements are coming in, you're seeing fraud claims that were paid out of our trust fund in an alarming amount.
let me just kind of give you the timeline of how this has all happened. This is all developing very quickly. The statements were mailed out approximately Friday. We received them on Monday. The employer also receives a copy of their reimbursable statement. Monday morning, I had 3 voicemail messages and 2 emails before I could even sit down with my first cup of coffee. And it was all from reimbursable employers, and they were all extremely alarmed that there was a high number of fraudulent claims on the charge statements. Yes, I have not personally audited them yet. I have not didn't have the time yesterday, but I'm intending to do that in advance, at least some of them in advance of our meeting tomorrow with the KDOL. So yes, at this point in time, one particular client emailed me earlier today and indicated that the 400 claims that appear on the charge statement, it appeared that close to 300 of them were reported as fraud at some point.
But we paid them anyway.
That's my understanding, yes.
And that's one client.
That's one client, yes.
We're trying to figure out in this committee how many individuals in Kansas have lost their identity. Would you care to venture a guess?
Well, I don't know. The numbers are just staggering. I mean, it really is. I mean, when you think about the number that my number is even short because of that 16,600 in the last month, we made an internal decision that we couldn't follow our normal protocol of entering the claim first and then notifying our client because we were overwhelmed. We had to get it out the door so they could have time to respond. So my number of 16,600 is very short because we've stopped entering the claims in our database for a period of time for the last 2 weeks because we just couldn't keep up. I bet you the number is probably closer to 18, 19,000. I mean, and that's just, I'm just a smaller service provider. There's companies like Equifax that are much bigger than me that do the same thing. And I can't believe that I'm unique in this aspect, that I'm the only one getting the fraudulent unemployment claims and other service providers are not.
Okay, and then finally, the businesses that you represent, that you do the HR for, how difficult is it going to be for them to survive or even stay in the state of Kansas if they have to pay as much in unemployment premium as they do in state income tax?
Well, I think that's going to be dependent upon each particular client. Obviously, my 60 school district clients, they're not going anywhere. We represent cities and counties and stuff like that. I don't know if it's so much a issue of it making or breaking a particular employer in the state. I think that there's other bigger problems in the state that are going to be that problem. But I certainly think it's going to be an issue. Again, this goes back to the trust fund problem. Okay, if the money's going out in fraudulent unemployment claims, you're not getting that money back because the bad guys aren't going to send it back to you. That has to be replenished some way. And the only source of revenue that you have to replenish the trust fund is the employers of the state.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Eric Stafford from the Chamber of Commerce. I believe he is virtual.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
All right. I'm going to keep my volume relatively low to try and avoid an echo. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here virtually today and for accommodating me to testify on behalf of the Kansas Chamber and NFIB Kansas, submitting joint testimony today. My name is Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs. We, as the Kansas Chamber, represent all businesses across the state of Kansas, small, medium, and large, and have been heavily involved in UI policy over the last few years. We've worked closely with Mr. Oswald and Mr. Hayes, Kansas SHRM and NFIB have. And I wanted to give a little bit of background today. I'm going to try to breeze through my written comments as quickly as possible because I think it's very important that you hear from Phil and what he has to say as well, in addition to what Jeff just covered. Overall, for the new committee members, the UI structure is independent on a state-by-state basis. We receive federal dollars that are largely used to fund the operations of the Kansas Department of Labor. The Benefits Trust Fund, that is entirely funded by employers. Employees do not pay into unemployment insurance. I know in the past there have been some conversations about changes to the trust fund system and critics over some of the proposals that were out there in the past, saying employees are paying into this, they need to have a right in how this works, and we need. No, it's 100% funded by employers. So I think that's the first piece that we need to clarify in case there's any questions. So if you think about unemployment insurance like car insurance, it should operate the same way. The cleaner driving record you have, the better or more favorable tax rate and ranking through the 27 rate groups you should have. Leading up to 2015, that wasn't always the case as we were building back the trust fund after the recession in 2008, 2009. So we have 27 rate groups. Rate group 1 is you get the most favorable rating. Rate group 27, you're going to have a higher rating, but 27 is not as bad as the 11 negative balanced rate groups. Those people, those employers and companies have paid out more in benefits than they've paid in taxes, the negative balance ones. So theoretically, the less you've used the system, the more you've paid in taxes and less you've paid out in benefits, you should earn a better rate, just like a clean driving record. As I mentioned, pre-2015, that wasn't necessarily the case. We've had several reforms, big reforms that are highlighted in our written testimony in 2013 and 2015. 2013 was more focused on the integrity side of things versus 2015 was truly really heavily focused on how employers were taxed. We made some big structural changes back in 2015 about that. The interesting thing was under the previous administration, Department of Labor, they were neutral to the changes that we were making. But we've all heard neutral testimony that's pretty concerned about the changes that are being made. And we've always had an open dialogue. I'd echo Jeff's comments that the acting secretary right now, we have a great relationship with him, fully trust his ability to work through these issues and get everything fixed. We have to get them fixed because, as Jeff alluded to, fraud is a huge concern. So, but back to 2015, as we changed the structure, the Department of Labor was worried that we would not bring in enough tax revenue for the system. But the projections that we had, Phil, I don't know how many megabytes this spreadsheet was or gigabytes this spreadsheet was, but he went back through anonymous data given by the Department of Labor and put in 30 years worth of history for unemployment insurance. And we looked at other states, like states in terms of population, industry makeup, and all that. What structure did we want to have? And that's what resulted in switching from an arrayed system to a fixed system. We compressed our positive rate groups down from 54 rate groups to 27. We put in statute tax credits when the trust fund balance gets really high, which it did as of January last year. We had $1.2 billion in our trust fund. We had legislators starting to ask, can we cut taxes on this because we have too much money in there? And we were saying at the time, it's like, you just got to trust the system. We don't know when the next thing will hit. And then COVID hit. So here we are. So we worked to design, and I say we, I was just the mouthpiece, and so was Dan for NFIB. Phil and Jeff did all the dirty nitty gritty data mining and came up with this array of switching from the array to the fixed structure. And we've designed it to try to live in a neutral state 95% of the time, where there's no tax increases, there's no tax cuts. We're just living at that neutral table. And Phil's going to talk about some of the parity issues that are coming out from those changes, and we have some legislation that we'll be introducing this year to bring. If Natalie hasn't done that yet, I missed the very beginning. But we have to work out some of the parity issues that are out there, because the best rated employers are going to be paying way more in terms of a percentage of a tax increase per employee than the negative balance employers. So we have to fix that. But overall, the integrity side of things in 2013 focused on severance pay and holiday pay and strengthening, who's eligible for benefits and when are they eligible for benefits. There were a few structural changes, phasing in an increase in the taxable wage base. That's partly as the reason why our UI system got out of whack, is our wage base was at $8,000 for, I think, 20 years roughly, if I'm remembering right off the top of my head. We phased that in to increase where it currently is at 14,000. It's probably worth looking at every 5, 7 to 10 years of maybe increasing that, $2,500 to $5,000 to tax the amount of wages per employee at the assigned rate in the rate table. So as inflation goes up and wages go up, then in order to have that creep where you just aren't taxing as much, then you're not bringing in as much into the fund, then it's just a structural thing we'll just continue to watch. So really, Jeff just hit on it. One of the top concerns we've had two concerns we've heard from our membership over the last 6 to 12 months, and it is fraud, the level of fraud in the system that's largely driven from the additional federal benefits, but also driven from the additional federal benefits is the difficulty getting individuals back to work. When they did lose their job from the pandemic and employers say, hey, we're ready to bring you back, somebody might be making more on unemployment insurance than they were working because of that $600 benefit. It wasn't means tested. It wasn't adjusted according to their income. It was everybody gets a flat $600 benefit. And so there's a chance they could be making way more than they were before the economic shutdown. And so you're not supposed to refuse work. But it happens, and it still happens. And as you heard earlier, I mean, Department of Labor is inundated with making sure that the proper people get benefits, let alone, ending benefits for people trying to get back to work. There's too much to overtake on the fraud side. But Mr. Chairman, the day that I testified in front of the Economic Recovery Committee meeting, I think it was in November, I come home and I got my letter in the mail saying that I had been approved for my benefits. So immediately put a fraud claim in. I think they got it stopped. And fortunately, I have the ability to contact people within the department to let them know that I've been flagged, but not everybody can do that. So it's a big issue. The income tax bill, Senate Bill 22 over on the Senate side, has provisions in there, just again, ensuring that individuals who are victims of UI fraud do not have to pay taxes on that. UI benefits are subject to income tax in the state. So we're trying to provide some tax protections for individuals there. I think to Representative Clayton's question about enforcement, I think there are laws in place on enforcement. I know we've had conversations with the Attorney General's office. They're monitoring, seeing what other states are doing, whether federal government's going to get involved in terms of identity fraud. But I'd be cautious of passing laws on top of laws that exist to protect individuals against identity theft and identity fraud. We just need to enforce what we already have in place, but we have to find the source. I don't think, to Representative Highland's question, I don't think we know the source, but I would echo Jeff. I don't believe just because this is a nationwide issue, it's something that's happening at the KDOL specific issue. So I'll wrap up. I do appreciate the opportunity to testify today and happy to answer any questions for you.
Thanks, Eric. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Before we move on, I wanted to recall up Jeff Oswald. I had one last question. My apologies. It was on the back side of my piece of paper. Jeff, thanks for coming back up. We went through the Q4 statements. I just want you to give the committee an idea. I mean, these are our schools that we're talking about. And they are reimbursing employers, which means they don't pay into the trust fund, and they have to pay these claims on their own, and they are reimbursed 50% by the federal government. So they are out of pocket 50%. Can you give me an idea as to the reimbursing employer, the one, how much did they identify on their statement as fraudulent claims that were paid that they're going to have to pay 50% of?
Can you hear me? Yeah. The information was that there was 403 claims charged on the statement. It was over $1 million in actual charges. Of course, you get a little bit less than $1 million, I think, in charges. Of course, you get the CARES Act reduction of 50%. So their total amount was coming around to about $900,000. And the email indicated to me that 75% of those 400 claimants was individuals that they believe have been reported as fraud. Again, I have not personally seen this yet, but if you just do a rough estimate, 75% of the $400,000+ that they're going to have to pay, then they're going to be out $300,000 or so, or somebody is anyway. So my numbers may be off. I have it in an email. I could get it for you, but that's a rough idea of what it is. It's a significant dollar amount.
If you could please get us that information when you can verify it, but $300,000 in one quarter for one of our school districts that they're out of pocket because of this is ridiculous. And that's the point. That's just the point I wanted to make. These are our schools. They're starving for money. At least they say they are. And our Department of Labor has got to get on top of this, and we've got to help them figure it out. Thank you. Phil Hayes, come on up. Thank you for coming all the way to Topeka.
Definitely. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for having me. Many of you are familiar with me. I've been involved in the UI reform space for probably the better part of a decade or a little more. I think there's a number of you that have been in the legislature in the 13 reform efforts as well as 15. So I'll keep my intro short. It's on my written statements. Hopefully you have that. The biggest thing that I want to hit on is I go back to February of last year. We had a couple legislators reach out saying, hey, can we take a look at maybe some additional credit tables or some ideas that we can offer some additional credit incentives for businesses because our trust fund is over $1 billion. And didn't just say yes, didn't say no, but went and looked and requested a data set from KDOL, got that, and spent some numbers. The COVID pandemic hit, and that kind of got derailed. The good news is we kept that data set and really started fine-tuning that through the summer months and visiting with the Special Committee for Economic Recovery. There's a lot of things that we had presented as maybe outcomes that the legislature should look at this year. From that committee, I think the testimony that we did in September and November, we have had about a half a dozen items. Since then, we have a little over 10 items that are going to be included in the bill that will be forthcoming. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of those items. The detail and kind of the overview of those 11 items are in my written testimony. But first and foremost is to create a unemployment compensation modernization and improvement council. And what this council would do is number one, bring the appropriate stakeholders into the mix and the seat at the table. You get the employer community represented as well as employees or claimants that have been impacted or utilize the system. But then also have legislators that are involved, maybe from the Commerce Committees on each chamber, as well as the Kansas Department of Labor, to ensure that we have the right parties engaging in the right conversations and identifying the right path forward. And probably the most important aspect of this committee is to ensure that we find a finish line and get across it. Because I know there's been a lot of back and forth as far as what administrations and how much money was allocated to the modernization effort for UI. We're going on 2+ decades now, and we don't have a great system to show for our state and to serve our customers on both sides of this equation. So I think that the creation of this council, it would be an 11-person council, would really just help give a steering voice as well as oversight on it to ensure that we move forward and we do it at an expeditious pace to ensure that we're not going to be in the same position with the next economic downturn. Number two, the modernization piece of it, the heavy focus has to be on the identity theft piece of it, the integrity of the system. Just to echo what Mr. Oswald had said, what can we do immediately today? Number one, we need to put the 2-point factor authentication in place immediately and stack on the identity theft component that Ascension has indicated that is doable with our legacy system. We talk about the modernization system. Our UI system was released and implemented before the first Atari game console came out. And you think about the evolution of game consoles, etc., that's pretty staggering to think in that capacity, and that there's only about 13 COBOL programmers across the states that can help other legacy states similar to Kansas. We're fighting over resources of a dying, antiquated system. So I won't hit on number three, but I think it's a very important component to better serve the recipients and Kansans that do find themselves looking at unemployment benefits. Number four, same thing, just as the kind of the funder, the main funding stream of this system is give us the data sets that we understand what is driving our tax rates as we move forward. Number 5, just a better alignment with the federal national standard of what full unemployment looks like, and the Federal Reserve identifies that at 5 to 5.2%. Our current statute shows 4.5%, and that's the first sliding trigger indicator when you think about the 16, 20, or 26 weeks. We would just like to be in conformity with the national standard. Number 6, I know there's been a lot of focus and discussion on the reimbursing employers. This would be a provision just to offset and provide some additional financial relief to those important employers across our state and in our communities. Number 7, recalibrate and balance the solvency and credit adjustment triggers and tax tables. This was kind of the foundational piece that we started with last February in offsetting additional credits for employers when our trust fund approaches that $1 billion mark. The tough thing is, the worst 3 recessionary periods in the last 20 years will impact and influence our tax rates as we move forward, and it's a 20-year period. 2003, 2008, and 2009 are those 3 variable years currently. I can tell you, I don't know if 2020 will ever fall off, maybe 2021. So we're probably going to be looking at one of the worst years from the Great Recession, plus these 2 back-to-back years with the amount of benefits that have paid out and how quickly our funds dissolved in each of those 2 periods. So this really is introducing 2 additional solvency tables and then mirroring those and introducing 5 additional credit tables. 5 years ago, I think I say everybody, I think Jeff and I, Mr. Oswald and I, were challenged to say that we would never be in a credit table position as a state. And we operated with a 0.5% credit in calendar year 2019 and calendar year 2020. Within 4 years, we were in that credit table. I think it's a pretty sound component. What we'd like to do is draw the parity component here on these solvency and credit adjustments. Right now, this was a provision that we looked at in 2013, and it was part of the compromise. It's basically a flat solvency adjustment, so it's a flat fixed percent. We want to apply the merit-rated principles to these adjustments, whether it's a tax increase or a tax decrease off of the neutral table. If we don't change anything come January 1st of next year, that best-rated employer in rate group 1 will see an 800% increase on their tax rate. The worst-rated employer, the employer that has more accidents than anybody else in the state, going back to Mr. Stafford's analogy, they will only see an increase of 21%. As an employer operating, doing good business, doing what we can to manage our claims and maintain good employment status, I would much rather have a 20% increase than an 800% next year. Just to put this in perspective, the top 10 rate groups under current statute, at the beginning of this year, there were nearly 38,000 rated employers, so nearly 65% of all rated employers in the state are in the top 10 rate groups. They will see a tax increase next year of 180% to 800%. The bottom 11 negative rate groups will only see an increase of 21 to 28.5%. And so what we want to do is build parity from top to bottom. So if we're going to have a solvency increase of 13%, every rate group would get that same 13% or 26%. And those are kind of the ranges, and they build and flow in between there. The chargeability economic relief for improper payments and fraudulent determinations, just to give you an example, another impact that reimbursing employers are carrying right now. Have a colleague out of Hutchinson, and I asked, she actually contacted me, hey, we have some fraud charges on our claim that we actually fought an appeal and won, and we didn't expect to see these. And I said, would you mind sharing that with me? She's carrying charges from 2011 because the state is still not recouped those dollars. So that's a 9-year impact that reimbursing employers carry this year over year over year until those Treasury offset programs kick in or the state can recoup those funds. So there has to be a better solution that if it is a determination made at no fault of the employer and they went through the appropriate channels, not only the immediate mountain of relief that we need from the COVID pandemic, but I think there's lingering stagnant charges that employers are carrying from yesteryear. Number 9, the dates here really just tie into the beginning of this pandemic, and if we're going to be aggressive and actually own a modernization effort, I say we get busy and get after it. And can we shoot for a December 31, 2022 modernization, Big Bang Theory, and let's just knock it out? These would allow any improper payments since the beginning of the pandemic until we have a new system that is going to better serve Kansas employers and claimants, to not have to carry the burden and carry extra water, because we're going to be buried on these tax increases that are coming. The number 10, enhancing the shared work program. This is a tremendous benefit. I think, number 1, we need to increase the awareness and the support for this position. If we could decrease hours and keep people attached to the labor force, keep their benefits in play, give them a pro rata share of unemployment. But I think in order to make this attractive, we have to reduce that administrative burden. So next, I want to hit on a couple of addendums that I included in my testimony. And if you could share my screen. I'm no longer connected, so we'll do this old school. I apologize. The first addendum A, and the addendums are...
Well, I think that most of us have it in front of us because we emailed it out to everyone. While we're doing that, committee, I guess I should have warned you that our unemployment system is extremely complex, and we've heard from Phil all year long, several meetings, and so he still talks above my head. I joked with Representative Johnson that his knowledge is as vast on this subject as Representative Johnson's is on tax and budgeting, so they could talk for hours. But it is very complex. He is always available for questions. We'll probably have him back, maybe virtually if he has time, before we start talking about the unemployment bill. But it is very complex. It's tied in with the federal government, and they have extra rules that we have to apply to, including the solvency of the trust fund, which is where we're in trouble, because these increases are automatic no matter what we do. So that's the issue. Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Just as we're getting this going, and I do apologize. I oftentimes get my hand slapped before I come into Topeka and say, keep it short and brief. But it's such a complex system, and there's a lot of gears that turn on it. So I apologize if I do get deeper than you'd like. See if this works. Probably in 2015, I think I was told by a legislator I needed to go on a data diet. So I've tried to learn my lesson and move forward. I apologize. We'll just keep it old school here. These were emailed out, so if you were to turn to page 4 in my testimony, we, in late November, early December, I was contacted by a couple law firms in town in Wichita, and they said they're getting an influx of calls from employers saying, hey, this fraud something's got to be done. To summarize, Jeff, enough is enough. And they said, would you be willing to speak and do a webinar on it? And so I contacted Jeff, and on the 18th, we pushed out an invite to have a webinar 2 days before Christmas. We had more than 500 people register. We had to cut it off. And one of our call to actions at the conclusion of that was to ask for feedback. I wanted some numbers. I'm a very objective, numbers-driven guy. So this handout was a survey done really within the last week of December and the first week of January, just getting some feedback from employers, looking at what division or what sector or industry they're in, total number of employees they currently have, average annual number of claims, the total claims they had in 19, total claims they've seen in 2020, and the number of those claims that were fraudulent in 2020. So if you look at those red numbers, those are the percentages that would represent the fraudulent cases that they self-reported back. The average is 73.14%. That is pretty close and similar to the information that Mr. Oswald presented today from those fourth quarter reimbursing employer chargeability statements. If you go to the next page, Addendum 2, Jeff really put me down a rabbit hole yesterday when I previewed his testimony and looking at Kansas being the third highest state for week ending 1/16 of 21 at 66,000 claims. It's staggering when you really try to level set this and look at it on a pro rata basis against our population, which would be that third gray box in there, total population, 2.9 million. Our total Kansas population represents less than 1% of the US population. Our claims is 2.27% of all the US population. So nearly, what is that, percent and a half over. Percent of unemployment claims total at 66,000 represents right under 7% of all claims in that 1 week across the United States. If you look at the far right table, 1.41 million head count, that was our number of employment in Kansas on the December labor report. Our percent of, so our employment is representative of our population, 0.96 versus the 0.91. But if you look at the far right and how we stack up with California, New York, Illinois, Texas, we're running nearly 4.6% of our claim count for that 1 week against our employment numbers for the month. And Illinois is just a shade under 2%, but we're still outpacing them by 2%.
Sorry, Phil, I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to. He is referencing a table that we emailed you shortly before the meeting today, right now. So he jumped from his testimony to the supporting document that Cindy emailed out shortly before. Sorry about that.
What this table shows, and if you look at it, Kansas has a fraction of the population of these larger states, and we're running third. And if you read deeper into the U.S. Department of Labor report for 1/16, Kansas is the second fastest surging state with an increase of 22,000 over the previous week. So we're running almost a 9.25% increase over what California is doing per capita. So it's definitely problematic. If we back out the potential fraudulent claims at 2,300 a day, magnify that by or multiply by 7, take out 16,100 claims, we're north of 50,000 claims in a single week. That's still adds up to more than our 4 neighboring border states plus Iowa and Arkansas. The 6 of those states had 44,000 claims in that same week. We're either 22,000 higher with everything apples to apples comparison, or if we back out our known fraud, which theirs will likely have some fraud but not near the volume, we're running at a fast pace. If you go to the next page, and these are just some summary estimates that I'm looked at and tracked as far as what I think the drain on the trust fund has been from a fraud and an improper payment standpoint. That first estimate, if you look at the far left, this was from the November report. I put this together probably a day or two before the previous chart, but 1.1 million employees working. The next column, regular claims in the last 44 weeks. These are the total claims, not PUA, not FPUC, not any of the federal programs. These are traditional Kansas claims, 1,060,000. If you take that 73%, that leaves 775,000, and if we multiply that by a single week of the average benefit amount of $356, we're looking at close to 277 million potential in fraud. If we don't like that, we can cut out the known fraud that DOL has presented, run that scenario, 593,000 claims against the average weekly benefit. We're still north of 200 million in fraud. What scares me is when you look at Kansas compared to California, California 3 weeks ago said we had $8 billion in fraud. Last week it was $9 billion, and as of yesterday they said 11.4 that they've quantified. They have another 17% of claims that they're sitting on the sideline investigating that have high suspicion of fraud, equating to the tune of about another $19 billion. So if California is potentially looking at $30 billion, how does Kansas rack up when we're outpacing them 9-1 on a particular week. I didn't have time. I was up late last night putting this week together. I think it would be worthwhile to look at the summary week to week to week through this entire pandemic. And but if I were a betting man, I would say Kansas's unemployment fraudulent activity got into pretty high gear in mid-October, found another higher gear 2 weeks later, and is about a 2-week increment. And we're going to get to another page in a minute just to show how quickly we're escalating up, and we are actually trending in the wrong direction. But if I were looking at everything, I would say our estimated fraud is probably between 300 and 600 million, and 300 is probably pretty conservative, but I'm building in myself a decent window.
Sir, that's out of our trust fund, or is that total?
I would say that would be total. I don't know how this spins out, but I do know that every claim in Kansas is going to start going through the traditional program, and the fraudsters are after the federal programs. That's where the money is. That's where it was incented. But if some slip through, just based on being inundated with claims, if some slip through the traditional, there's likely going to be some fraud there. I don't know how much Kansas owns, how much our trust fund owns, how much is applied to the federal. But it's interesting that a lot of states are able to quantify this, and they've been reporting it since early summer. If you flip to my next page, Addendum C, just high points here. I've got row numbers on the far left just so we could talk through this. The trust fund balance on line 1, the day after Christmas was $375 million. On 1/16, it was $273 million. Doesn't seem too bad. We've lost $1 million. But if you look at line 12 to the far right and look at the last 4-week average, we've actually paid out over 151 in traditional benefits, not the federal stuff. It seems like an excessive amount of dollars coming out of our traditional trust fund. So to answer your question, Chairman, there's going to be a fair amount, obviously, in the federal piece, but I think we are, our system leads the fraudsters to probably find avenues to get into the traditional trust fund too. So we're burning through about 150 million every month.
That number seems awful high, considering that most of our citizens that filed for unemployment in March and April would have timed out of our system. So how are they back in it, and why is it so high?
Just from experiencing claims come in, I know claims get backdated, and again, that's where the fraudsters are doing. They're trying to get back into that $600 kicker time period. There's a lot of states that no longer backdate claims. That may be another avenue that we should look at immediately. But it's the amount of claims, again, on line 12, and we went from 30 million to 34 million to 41 million to 44.5 million. I've not looked at the numbers today. They're being released today. But this trend would indicate that we're probably closer to $50 million for this week alone. And on September 17th, I had spoke to the special committee and forecasted that our trust fund was going to be bankrupt by March 5th. I'm now projecting we'll be bankrupt by February 27th. And that's with first quarter contributions coming in. We're going to limp in to get to the end of April. If you go to the next page, my best case, worst case scenario on how we close this year out, if we don't do anything, best case, just put faith that the fraudsters are going to leave us alone or don't accelerate and find another gear. We're going to close the year out, worst case scenario, nearly $1.8 billion in deficit. If we use the 44-week average, not the last 4-week average of the entire pandemic, we'll close this year out in the hole a little over $1 billion. If we go to Addendum E and you start scenario planning, and if we can get a hold on our benefits and start plugging the holes and decreasing these by 25% in blocks of months at a time, we're still likely at the current 4-week clip that we're at, because that's where we're starting from, we're still looking at $1 billion in borrowing by December 31. We have to do something, and we have to do it as soon as possible. If you look at Addendum F, I just want to draw a note that there's 22 states that have filed advance activities to borrow from the U.S. Department of Labor. In the first 20 weeks of the pandemic, 19 states borrowed just a hair over $19 billion. 14 weeks later, another $21.2 billion was borrowed. 3 additional states added, and here we are as of 1/20. There's 22 states that are currently borrowing. They added another $7.4 billion. We're sitting right under $48 billion that 22 states have borrowed. Addendum G shows it took more than 3 years for 33 states to borrow $41 billion from the Great Recession. And if you want to put a visual to it, go to Addendum H, and that will carve out the 12-month period and how quickly the borrowing has escalated compared to the 3-year period from the Great Recession. I don't know where the ceiling is on this. Most other states have put a cap on it, and they figured out how to get a handle on it. Back in the summer, I had legislators reach out to me and ask what we could do. What would be a dollar amount that you would estimate if we could get some CARES Fund dollars to backplug the trust fund? I said $300 million. I think I was thinking pretty lofty at the time. Figure if it's like any other sales or negotiation tactics, we're going to negotiate, and I'd probably end up in the middle. $150 million, that'd been nice to have, but I don't think it's going to be a drop in the bucket. It's going to cover 1 month of our outlay. We're one of the smaller states. We're in the top third for the richest benefits, and that's another attraction for the fraudsters. If you want to understand how deep and wide the fraud activity is, Google scattered canary, and it'll tell you that we are working with our law enforcement community. I know KDOL, they're a law enforcement powers. They're working with the FBI, the Secret Service. This issue has been on the radar as a top priority, but I don't know if we were just waiting for the legislature to convene before we could actually take action, but we've lost a lot of valuable ground to probably intercept a lot of this. With that, I'll stand for questions now or at the appropriate time.
Okay. Numbers are staggering. I want to ask you how to fix it, but I know you probably don't know, but I think we're looking for a new secretary in the Department of Labor. I hope you're interested in that. Can you take a second and explain, several times this year, the Finance Council has called to put CARES Act dollars into the Unemployment Trust Fund, and the governor vetoed that, leaning on the 0% loan that is automatically triggered when we go into bankruptcy, per se. Can you explain the ramifications of that, especially as it comes to the federal issues and the solvency rate?
A couple of things. The U.S. Feds have actually been trying to decrease the solvency or increase the solvency standard, so to make it more difficult on states to get 0% interest. So we're not there yet, but I suspect that'll come at some point. The bill reforms that we're introducing, number one, we have to take care of our adjustments, because that's an 800% increase or 100% increase for a lot of businesses. But the federal component, when you fast forward and you go through to January 1st, so let's just understand that we're going to be deficit this year. We'll be in a borrowing position January 1 of 22. We'll be in a borrowing position in January of 23. That's our second get out of jail card free. Now we have until November 10th of 2023 to pay 100% back, or we're going to be facing the interest on our outstanding loan at that time, which currently is 2.27%. Over the last 6 weeks, it's inched up progressively on these particular advanced dollars. So it's, you know, I've sat and had conversations with friends and family, and they said, what if Kansas can't get a loan from the feds? I assure you, Kansas is going to get a loan. We're going to see Kansas's name on this advance where we've applied. My suspicion is we should be looking at a minimum of $150 million a year. But to answer your question, January 1 of 2024, we start losing our FUTA credit reduction. So now, and each reduction, each year thereafter, while we have an outstanding balance, is 0.3 of a decrease off of, or an addition of our FUTA rate. So we're going to go from 0.6 to 0.9 for every employer. And then in 2025, we're going to go from 0.9 to 1.2. And when you look at these best case, worst case scenarios, hold your breath that we're only looking at $1 billion deficit at the end of next year, so we can get out of jail in 4 years, hopefully. But if we're looking at 1.8 billion, we're probably 9 years down the road. We're going to be looking at 2030 before we're paying off the ramifications of this fraud hole that we have going on.
Phil, you deal with a lot of private sector employers. how hard is it going to be, as I asked Jeff earlier, how hard is it going to be for your clients to stay in Kansas, or how hard is it going to be to move a business to Kansas when they have to pay as much as unemployment as they do in state income tax?
Forget the FUTA reduction piece of it in 3 years, because we've got a little bit of time to do some fixes. If nothing has changed this year, my contributions will go from about $20,000 to about $400,000 in a year, because I have a pretty high reserve, but we're going to be penalized. 65+% of the employers that are really good actors in this state are going to get hammered and be penalized financially if no revisions are done there. So we have a 3-year plan to do something, and in some of my reforms, I don't know if I'm being too bold, but the business community's sense is we would like a more up-to-date system. We would like not to be a target of fraud. We would like to have had identity theft pieces. We were asking for relief mid-year, so we're looking for some relief mechanisms, whether it's from the state general fund or some other fund throughout the state, because when we were told that we wouldn't see charges, we're seeing charges now, but the other side of that phrase was, you won't see any chargeability, but guess what? We're going to pay for it, and we're going to pay for it for probably the better part of a decade as we roll forward.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. And it is very shocking to see this put out in clear numbers. $300 million. Could you give us an overall snapshot of what you think the percentage of total UI claims are fraudulent based on your experience? Just an estimate.
And I know the BAM metric, that 14.21%, that is completely unique to every single state. The improper funds, that's work search requirements, that's job refusal. There's a number of things that go into that. I don't know that I can fathom a guess at this, because Kansas's high watermark as far as number of fraudulent cases, it's my understanding that in 2013 we had 7. And we didn't have the scattered canary targeting us as the number or top 3 state in the nation to go secure funds.
So then my second question is, what's the realistic recovery of some of this money, $300 million? How much would be realistically be recovered? 0? Some?
If federal dollars are recovered, it's my understanding that those get recovered and sent back to the feds. The state funds, I don't know the realistic piece of that. I mean, like Mr. Oswald indicated, these monies are offshore, and as much as we like to be hopeful with it, state of Washington, I think it was back in May or June, they were one of the early states identified that they were stung for $500 million. And the very next day, they went and recouped maybe $300 million of it back.
So basically right now, the incompetence of basically us, Kansas, we have lost $300 million. Taxpayers have lost $300 million with more money that could possibly go out the door on any given week. Is that correct?
300, and yeah, more any given week, and I don't know that 300 is it, but there's a value somewhere. And I'm just looking at some rough analytics. I know there's a post-audit results that are coming in March. I can tell you, come March, our house is going to be burnt down, and we're going to be looking at rubble and ash at that point. I mean, the burn rate is just astounding.
And I would like you to communicate with me offline regarding the legislative post-audit and making sure that we are looking or asking the right questions so we can get the right answers back to the legislature. But my final question actually would be something for our committee for the Department of Labor. Can they provide us the percentage of claims that have been filed? When someone goes online and they file a fraudulent claim, and then it comes back around and they file another fraudulent claim, so can we get an idea what that percentage is of repeat payments when a fraudulent claim has been reported? We had some testimony earlier that is happening. So what percentage? Because I think most of us think when we make our a report, our fraud report, that it's done, that there will be no more claims paid. So perhaps that could be added to our list of questions for Department of Labor to return back to our committee.
Just if I could add some additional clarity to the chairman's question on how do employers deal with this. My suspicion is there may be additional layoffs to pay a tax bill that's going to be coming, because I don't know how else businesses absorb that when we're looking at the level that's coming.
So it's a spiral. Creates more people to collect unemployment. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for being here. I do appreciate your data that you have brought to us today. I would like to just make a request of the chair that if possibly, as soon as possible, we hear from legislative post-audit, because they are our employees. They are the people that we run things by. We've heard from Department of Labor. We've heard from the employers. And I believe that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think that in the middle of a catastrophe, we need to work the problem and not make things worse by guessing. We need to also watch catastrophizing. Remember, we are legislators. We should not be panicking. I really want to hear from post-audit on this as soon as we can. Any past post-audits they might have done, I think would be useful to us. I'll look at that up myself, but Mr. Chair, if we could have them in here, I think that that would be very helpful to us.
So I agree with you. It would be nice to hear from them. However, most of the data is just now coming in. As we heard, the fourth quarter reports are just now being issued. They were sent out less than a week ago, and we're already hearing back in one case that there was $700,000 of fraudulent claims paid on that one report. And I do agree with you that it would be nice if the Department of Labor would give us real answers to the questions. And as far as the post-audit goes, I'll let Representative Williams comment on where we are on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Post-audit will not release that until March, and so having them come to this committee prior to that will not be helpful because they will not release that information at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, would they be able to comment on any past audits that they have done on anything regarding UI fraud? Do we have anything like that from them regarding previous?
Representative Williams, can you opine to that?
We could look and see what past audits have been done. I don't think it would have any bearing on what is going on right now, the level of fraud, the number of cases. We've heard testimony of how different 7 fraud cases a few years ago versus, I mean, hundreds, thousands. I just don't think it would be helpful, but you can go to the post-audit webpage and find all the previous audits and see if there's any comparisons you can draw.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Guys, I really, really appreciate the literally hundreds of hours you've put into this so far this year with us. I realize that we lean on you pretty heavy, but you are the professionals in this industry, and just really appreciate all the work. I hope we can get a good solid bill out of here with good solutions. And committee, I guess be careful what you wish for. Each of you requested to be on this committee, so sorry that we're so busy, but this is extremely important, and this should be something that'll last for years. I skipped over bill introductions. Are there any bill introductions? I think we had some people online that with bill introductions. Okay. Seeing none. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Were you scheduled to testify? Oh, come on up.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the business community, Kansas SHRM, the Kansas Chamber, NFIB, we've been working together with multiple partners and putting a bill together. And so I would like to respectfully request it's RS 0580 be officially introduced. It's a bill that'll look at modernizing the system, which we think is the most critical to take care of much of the fraud that we've experienced, as well as looking at addressing how we pay back the trust fund and replenish it, and a few other outlines that Phil talked about.
Without objection, we'll enter that. Any other billing questions? Seeing none. With that, we're scheduled tomorrow on
Mr. Chairman.
Chair. I don't have
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Hi, this is Pam Curtis.
Hi,
Representative Pam Curtis. I am virtual with you today, but I'm just wondering what the process is because I raised my hand earlier And so I don't know if somebody's watching that raise hand function, if we have a question, but just want to know what that process should be. Should I send you a text, I have a question, or will somebody please watch the raise hand function?
Yes, Representative Curtis, we are trying to do the best to make sure we catch everyone. We're sorry that we missed your hand, but please, if you could maybe text Representative Clayton if we miss you, so that she's right next to me, and believe me, if she needs something, she lets me know.
I have no doubt about that. But if I could ask Eric Stafford, my question was actually for him. And if he could please just shoot me an email with his telephone number, I can take my question offline for him. I'd appreciate that. If he's still on, Eric.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, would you
I'm
please just send me your phone number so I can give you a call?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So tomorrow we're scheduled on call of the chair. I do not have anything for you so that you can study these numbers, and we'll see you Thursday. Don't forget we're going to work the angel investment bill, and you have to be in the building to vote. Thank you. We're adjourned.